That bag of gravel you poured into the bottom of your pot? It didn't drain your soil. It drowned your roots. Pull a struggling tomato plant out of its container right now, and here's what you'll probably find. The top inch of soil, bone dry. But the bottom of that root ball, black, mushy. It smells like rot, not soil. That's not bad luck. That's gravel doing exactly what millions of gardeners were told it would never do. And that's just lie number 1. There are 6 more coming after it, and every single one is quietly capping your harvest without you ever knowing it's happening. Here's what's strange about all 7 of these. None of them are fringe ideas from some random blog. Every one of them shows up in mainstream gardening advice, repeated in videos, forums, even printed on the back of seed packets. Millions of container gardeners are following instructions right now that are working directly against them, and they'll never know it because the plant doesn't die immediately. It just quietly underperforms season after season and gets blamed for it instead of the advice. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why your containers have been underperforming and what actually fixes it. If container gardening is something you care about, hit subscribe now, because we break down the real science behind growing food at home every single week. Let's get into it. Skip the gravel. Full stop. That's the fix. Now here's the part almost nobody understands about why it backfires so badly. Water doesn't fall through soil just because gravity is pulling on it. It moves because of something called capillary tension, and here's the easiest way to picture it. A dry sponge held above a puddle will pull water upward into itself against gravity because the tiny holes inside that sponge are hungry for it. Potting soil behaves the exact same way. Fine particles, tight little pores, pulling water in and holding onto it stubbornly. Gravel has the opposite problem. Its gaps are too wide. There's nothing for water to grip onto, so it just sits there, refusing to move into the rock layer below it. Picture your pot. Fine soil sitting on top of chunky gravel. Water moving down through that soil hits the gravel, and it will not cross into it. Not one drop. Not until the soil directly above is completely soaked. Every pore full, with nowhere left to hold anymore. Only then does gravity finally win. Here's the part that flips everything you thought you knew. That swampy, saturated zone doesn't disappear because you added gravel. It just gets pushed higher up into the pot, closer to your roots, because the gravel is taking up space at the bottom that used to be part of your growing area. You didn't drain your plant. You built it a smaller pot with a flood zone permanently sitting at the bottom of it. And it gets worse the moment you look at what that flood zone actually does to a root. Oxygen down there can drop to roughly 10,000 times lower than what's available in open air. Root cells switch into a kind of emergency survival mode, similar to your muscles burning out during an all-out sprint. Normally, a root cell can pull 36 units of usable energy out of a single molecule of sugar. In that flood zone, it gets 2. Just 2. Roots weaken, they turn soft and mushy. Root rot organisms move in for the finish, and by the time you notice yellowing leaves up top, the damage below has usually been building for weeks. And here's the cruel irony. The symptoms of a drowned root and a thirsty root look almost identical from above ground. Wilting leaves, slow growth. A gardener sees wilting and assumes the plant needs more water, so they water it again, deepening the exact flood zone that caused the wilting in the first place. It's a cycle that can quietly run all season without ever being noticed for what it actually is. So, if you've been doing this for years, don't feel bad about it. This is one of the most repeated pieces of advice in gardening history, passed from gardener to gardener, generation after generation. It's just also one of the most wrong. The real fix, if drainage is genuinely a concern? A taller, narrower pot beats a rock layer every single time because a deeper column of soil pulls that flood zone down and out through the drainage holes far faster than a short, wide container ever could. Now here's where it gets worse. Even if you skip the gravel completely, your soil might already be sabotaging you in a totally different way. Quick question, have you ever reused last year's potting mix and your plant just struggled for no obvious reason? Same bag, same brand, same care routine. Worse results? Here's the reveal. That bag of soil that drained beautifully last spring can quietly turn into a dense, waterlogged brick by the following summer, using the exact same watering routine that used to work perfectly fine. Regular garden soil is even worse in a pot, and here's why. In the ground, soil has structure. Old root channels left behind by last year's plants, earthworm tunnels, natural cracks that let air move freely through the whole profile. The second you scoop that same soil into a container and cut it off from all of that surrounding structure, it collapses. Loose garden soil that once had roughly a quarter of its volume as breathable airspace can drop below 1/20th of that once it's compacted inside a container. Roots simply cannot push through a wall that dense, no matter how much fertilizer you throw at it. Bagged potting mix isn't safe from this either. The organic material inside it, things like peat moss or coconut coir, slowly breaks down over the season as microbes feed on it. Big, airy pockets that used to hold oxygen collapse into tiny, tight pores that hold water and choke air out almost completely. Same bag, same plant. Completely different soil 6 months later, and most gardeners never realize the soil itself is the thing that changed underneath them. The fix is building a mix that resists that collapse in the first place. Peat or coir blended with perlite and pine bark holds its structure far longer, because bark chunks and perlite don't compress the way pure organic material does on its own. And if you're reusing a container from last season, don't just top it off with a scoop of fresh soil on top. Refresh a real portion of that old mix, because the structure you're counting on underneath has already started falling apart. There's a simple way to check which situation you're actually in. Squeeze a handful of moist soil from the container in your fist. If it holds together in a dense, heavy clump that barely crumbles when you poke it, that structure has already collapsed. Good container mix should break apart easily, almost fluffy, even when it's damp. Here's a mistake that has nothing to do with soil, water, or fertilizer at all. It's about size. And it's the one that quietly shuts a plant down without you ever seeing it happen, because nothing about it looks visibly wrong. Most gardeners assume a small pot just means a smaller plant. Shorter, more compact. Otherwise perfectly fine. That's wrong. And the reason has nothing to do with running out of physical room for roots to spread. Here's the part that surprises people the most. The moment a root tip touches something hard and unmovable, like the plastic wall of a pot, the plant sends itself an internal stress signal. That signal travels all the way up through the plant's water-carrying tissue into the leaves, and it tells the tiny pores responsible for breathing in carbon dioxide to partially close. Those pores are how a plant builds the sugars it needs for fruit, flowers, and growth. When they close, even partially, energy production drops immediately. Even if the soil underneath is perfectly moist. Even if it's packed full of fertilizer. Your plant isn't underperforming because it's hungry or thirsty. It's underperforming because its own body told it to slow down the second its roots felt boxed in, and it will keep doing that for the rest of the season. Picture two identical tomato plants. Same fertilizer, same sunlight, same water, same seed packet. One in a 5-gallon pot, one in a 20-gallon pot. Wildly different harvests by August. Not because of luck. Because one of them has been chemically holding itself back from the roots up since the day its roots first hit that wall. The fix is sizing your container for the mature plant, not the seedling sitting in front of you right now. A tomato that will eventually stand 5 feet tall and load up with dozens of fruit needs 15 to 20 gallons of room, not the small bucket it looks perfectly happy in during week 2. And there's a telltale sign this has already happened to a plant you're currently growing. Pull it from the pot at the end of the season, and if the roots have circled around and around the inside wall instead of spreading outward and downward, that plant hit its stress point early and spent the rest of the year compensating for it instead of thriving. Fabric grow bags actually solve this in a clever, almost accidental way. When a root tip reaches the fabric wall, it dries out slightly right at that edge instead of circling endlessly along solid plastic. That triggers the plant to branch off into new roots instead, building a denser, more efficient root system rather than one long root trapped in a loop. Remember that gravel from the beginning? Here's where an old mistake connects to a brand new one. Even a perfectly sized, perfectly drained pot can still cook your plant alive. From the outside in, black plastic containers are everywhere. Cheap, sturdy, easy to find at any garden center. But on a hot, sunny afternoon, the soil inside a black plastic pot can climb past 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Set that same plant in a terracotta pot instead, and the soil tops out closer to 88 degrees. Switch to a fabric grow bag and it barely breaks 80. Same sun, same day, same plant. A 40-degree swing based purely on what the container is made of. Your plant's roots were never built to handle the black plastic version of that number. Past the mid-90s, the outer membranes of root cells start physically breaking down. The plant burns precious energy just trying to repair that damage, energy that was supposed to go toward flowers and fruit instead. Push it far enough, hot enough, long enough, and the plant abandons its flowers completely, just to survive the heat wave happening 6 inches under the soil surface. So, a plant sitting in a black pot on a sunny patio in July isn't underperforming because of bad genetics or a bad growing season. It's cooking from the roots up, on a day that looked absolutely perfect for growing, with full sun, healthy leaves, and a gardener doing everything else right. The fix is simple. Give dark pots afternoon shade if you're stuck with them, or switch to lighter colors, terracotta, or fabric grow bags, which let excess heat and moisture escape through the material instead of trapping both underground. Even a couple of inches of mulch spread across the surface of a dark pot makes a real difference, shading the soil directly and slowing how fast that heat builds up in the first place. Now, fertilizer. This is the one that confuses organic gardeners more than almost anything else, because they do everything right, follow every instruction on the bag, and their plants still act hungry. Here's the reveal. It's not the fertilizer that's failing. It's the workforce that's supposed to process it. Dry, granular organic fertilizers, the feather meal, bone meal, composted manure type, don't feed your plant directly. Bacteria living in the soil have to break them down first into a simpler form your roots can actually absorb. Garden soil has an established bacterial community, built up over years, ready to do exactly that job. Fresh bagged potting mix does not. It starts out essentially sterile, straight out of the bag with no bacterial workforce waiting to help. So in cool spring weather, that bacterial activity crawls to a near stop, and your fertilizer just sits there in the soil doing almost nothing, while your plant starves for nutrients that are technically right there the entire time. Then summer heat speeds those same bacteria back up, and all of that built-up fertilizer can release at once in a sudden spike strong enough to burn root tips and block the plant from absorbing other nutrients like potassium and calcium. Same bag of fertilizer. 2 completely different failures, months apart, and most gardeners blame the plant instead of the timing. The fix is feeding containers differently than you'd feed a garden bed. Lean on liquid feeds or pre-processed controlled-release granules, especially early in the season, before that bacterial workforce is fully awake and doing its job. A simple rule of thumb: if the soil in your container still feels cool to the touch first thing in the morning, that bacterial breakdown is likely still moving slowly, and a liquid feed will get nutrients to your plant far faster than a dry granular one sitting there waiting on microbes that haven't clocked in for the season yet. Here's a version of that same fertilizer mistake that runs in the exact opposite direction, and it catches gardeners who are trying to do everything right by feeding heavily. Salts, from fertilizer, any fertilizer, organic or synthetic, build up in a container the same way they'd build up in a bathtub with no drain. Water evaporates. The salt stays behind. Water again. More salt stays behind. Ground soil has enough volume and enough natural flushing from rain to keep this in check. A container does not. Once that salt concentration crosses a certain point, it actually pulls water back out of the roots instead of letting the roots pull water in. Your plant can be standing in perfectly moist soil and still be physiologically thirsty wilting on a day when the container feels heavy and wet to the touch. The fix here is flushing. Every few weeks, run a heavy, slow volume of plain water through the container until it drains freely out the bottom, well beyond what the plant needs that day. That flush carries excess salt out with it before it ever reaches a damaging level. Watch for a crusty white or yellowish buildup forming on the surface of the soil or around the drainage holes. That's a visible warning sign this is already happening, and it's your cue to flush that container well before the leaves start showing scorched browning edges. Now here's one almost every single gardener does, multiple times a week, without ever questioning it. You press a finger into the top inch of soil. Dry. You water. Feels responsible. Feels careful. It's also often wrong. Remember that soggy flood zone from the very beginning, the one gravel creates at the bottom of a pot? It doesn't need gravel to exist. Any container can quietly develop one on its own. And the top inch of soil dries out fast, because it's exposed directly to sun and moving air all day long. But the bottom of that same pot can still be sitting completely saturated underneath, hidden from that quick finger test entirely. And the numbers here are more extreme than most gardeners expect. A large leafy tomato plant on a hot, dry summer day can pull close to a gallon of water out of its container just through its leaves. If that container only holds 10 or 12 gallons of soil total, that plant can run through its usable water in a matter of hours, not days, especially with a chunk of that volume already locked up in a saturated flood zone it can't fully use anyway. So you water based on a dry surface, and you end up pouring more water onto a container that's already flooded underneath. Dry on top, drowning below, on repeat, all season long, and the plant never gets a real chance to recover from either problem. A better test is weight, or checking moisture several inches down with a wooden stick or a moisture meter, not just the surface. A container that feels genuinely light in your hands has earned a full watering. One that still feels heavy, even with bone-dry surface soil, is very likely still soaked underneath and needs to be left alone. If lifting the pot isn't practical, a plain wooden skewer pushed down to the bottom works almost as well. Pull it out, and damp soil will cling to it. Dry soil won't. That single test tells you more about what's actually happening underneath than a week of finger checks on the surface ever will. And that exact habit leads straight into one of the most misunderstood problems in all of gardening. Blossom end rot. That dark, sunken, leathery patch that shows up on the bottom of an otherwise perfectly healthy tomato or pepper. The internet's answer is almost always the same. Add calcium. Crushed eggshells, garden lime, calcium sprays, all built on one shared assumption. That your soil simply doesn't have enough of it. Here's the twist that surprises most people. In the vast majority of home garden soil, there's already plenty of calcium sitting right there, untouched. This usually isn't a shortage problem at all. It's a delivery problem. Calcium can only travel in one direction inside a plant, upward, riding along the water stream, evaporating out through the leaves. And leaves pull much harder on that stream than fruit does, because leaves lose far more water to the surrounding air. So calcium naturally heads for the leaves first every time, and fast-growing fruit can get left behind entirely, even while sitting just inches away on the same vine. Anything that interrupts that steady water flow, inconsistent watering, humid still air, root damage from that drowned flood zone we already talked about, can cut off calcium's ride to the fruit completely, even with plenty of it sitting in the soil the entire time. That's exactly why dumping in more calcium so often changes nothing. You're not solving a shortage, you're adding more cargo to a truck that was never the actual problem. The real fix is consistency. Steady, even watering, so that steady stream and the calcium riding along inside it actually makes it all the way out to the fruit, instead of stalling out at the leaves like it usually does. This is also why blossom end rot so often shows up right after a stretch of wildly uneven weather, a dry week followed by a heavy rain, or a missed watering followed by a flood. It's rarely the calcium level in the soil that changed during that stretch. It's the consistency of delivery that broke down. So here's where that leaves you. Skip the gravel because it lifts the flood zone higher instead of draining it away. Refresh your soil, because collapsed structure chokes out roots even with nutrients sitting right there. Size your container for the mature plant, because a cramped root zone shuts down photosynthesis through its own internal stress signal. Watch your pot color in the heat, because black plastic can cook roots 40 degrees hotter on a day that looks absolutely perfect. Feed containers differently than garden beds, both when you add fertilizer and how often you flush it, because a container behaves nothing like a garden bed. And check moisture by weight, not just the surface, because dry on top can still mean drowning underneath. Every one of these mistakes shares the exact same root cause. A pot isn't a smaller garden bed. It's its own separate environment, running on its own separate physics, and the moment you treat it like ground soil, it quietly punishes you for it, one harvest at a time. None of this requires expensive equipment or a science background to fix. It requires unlearning a handful of habits that felt logical enough to never question, and replacing them with an understanding of what's actually happening inside that container, out of sight, every single day your plant is sitting in it. The gardeners getting the biggest harvests out of the smallest spaces aren't doing anything mysterious. They've just stopped treating a pot like a miniature garden bed and started treating it like what it actually is. If one of these caught you off guard, tell me which one in the comments right now. Give this video a like if it just explains something you've been getting wrong for years, and subscribe if you want to keep growing smarter instead of just growing harder.